It's really difficult to determine the truth of philosophical ideas. It's not like a hard science where we can apply rigor and experimentation, and that's often why people don't trust philosophical ideas. Usually we can only know if they're true if we experience them, if they come through in our lived experience and we observe their truth in our reality. Another way we can do it through the written word, or at least get a close approximation of the truth, is if we find the same conclusion in different cultures. We can be fairly sure that there's some truth in that statement, since these different cultures had different starting points and still work through to this conclusion. So I just found an idea about this recently that essentially has to do with virtue signaling, and signaling that you are virtuous, showing that you're not virtuous or that you've lost your virtue. And the three thinkers that I'm going to reference here are from vastly different cultures. The first one is Naval Ravikant. He's a modern day tech investor, one of the early investors in Uber, talks a lot about Buddhism and business, has a famous tweet storm on how to get rich. Another one is Alan Watts, a Zen Buddhist philosopher who takes those Eastern ideas and applies them to his Western upbringing, was really popular back in the 60s or 70s, sort of a more hippie philosopher. And then lastly, the opposite of a hippie philosopher would be Thomas Carlyle, who's a Victorian author. So we have three different thinkers, three very different starting points, and yet they still hit on this idea that signaling your virtue, mostly through words, is a sign that you don't have it or that you're losing it. So first, let's start off with Naval's quote, and here it goes. And so it's very hard to work with people who end up being low integrity. And it's hard to figure out who is high integrity and low integrity. Generally, the more someone is saying that they're moral, ethical, and high integrity, the less likely they are to be that way. It's very much like status signaling. If you overtly bid for status, if you overtly talk about being high status, that is a low status move. If you openly talk about how honest, reliable, and trustworthy you are, you're probably not that honest and trustworthy. That is a characteristic of a con man. So what Naval's saying here is when you're picking a partner in business, you have to look at their characteristics and see how they act to see if they're honest, if they have integrity, if they're trustworthy. If they're talking about it too much, it's probably not true. That wouldn't be a good person to partner with for your business or your project, whatever it might be. Next, we have Alan Watts, and here's his quote. Superior virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue. Therefore, it is virtue. Inferior virtue is conscious of itself as virtue. Therefore, it is not virtue. It is hooked on being virtuous. A tree excels at being a tree, and nobody knows how it does it. There is no way of imitating a tree, except only thing is to be one. And so in this, that can't be right, but whatever. And so in the same way, when a human being shows extraordinary skill of something, it seems that it comes natural to him. It seems that he doesn't achieve it by any kind of artificiality. If there is some discipline in it, it is concealed. So excelling in something naturally, and yet it is something so difficult to understand that this is a butchered quote, but whatever. What he's basically saying here is that real virtue would never call itself virtue. Once you call yourself virtue, you're conscious of your virtue, and therefore it's no longer virtue, right? Very Zen philosophy. And then a genius person would make everything look natural. They wouldn't show any artificiality. It wouldn't look like this was discipline or this was formula. It would just look like it's innate in them. It wouldn't look like they just copied a textbook to get to their genius. So apply the same thing to virtue there, right? Like being natural is a sign that you actually have something. It's not going to look formulaic. Right, and last is the quote from Thomas Carlyle. Already to the popular judgment, he who talks much about virtue in the abstract begins to be suspect. It is shrewdly guessed that where there is a great preaching, there will be little almsgiving. Or again, on a wider scale, we can remark that ages of heroism are not ages of moral philosophy. Virtue, when it can be philosophized of, has become aware of itself. It is sickly and beginning to decline. So here he's looking at different eras in history, really, and saying that all these eras of moral philosophy, they're not eras of heroism. So once these cultures are talking too much about moral philosophy, trying to determine morality, they don't have morality. That's why they have to talk about it. And he actually uses a tree example as well, similar to the Alan Watts one I butchered there, where he says, you don't hear a tree that's growing. You don't hear a tree that's thriving. You only hear a tree when it falls. And so same thing with moral philosophy here. You don't hear about morality in a moral culture. You only hear about morality when the culture has started to lose its morals. And that can apply to any different ideas, such as patriotism, such as conscientiousness, right? Whatever you might think. Once we start talking about it too much, it's a sign that we don't have it. So, conclusion, beware of virtue signaling in yourself, in other people. Once something like virtue is spoken of, systematized, trying to give in formulas, it's probably not there. It's something that lives through action alone, like many other things. All right, thank you.